Hello, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. This is Andrew Gill, and today we are sharing another episode of a Big Questions Project podcast, one of our sibling podcasts from this grant program at PRX that supported our first two seasons. A few weeks ago, we shared an episode from a podcast called Mother is a Question, and today we are sharing an episode of Second Sunday. Second Sunday is about Black queer folks finding, keeping, and sometimes losing faith. We feel like the episode we're sharing today is something that could appeal to a lot of Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. This is about a pipe organist with quite a pedigree, Juilliard, Yale, but dealing with his own identity in his work as a musician. It's, I think, a really great episode. And so check it out. If you like it, look it up. The podcast is Second Sunday. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colleagues, Esther and Darren.
There is no place like the Cube.
Hey, I'm Darren.
And I'm Esther, and this is Second Sunday, a podcast about Black queer people finding, keeping, and sometimes losing faith.
As an organist, pipe organist, I realized there was a whole genre of music that I couldn't play. I had just graduated from Juilliard, and I was working at the Convent Avenue Baptist Church in Harlem, and one of the Sundays they had asked me to play This Little Light of Mine, and the minister of music said, Mark, you able to do this? And I was like, yeah. I kind of was offended. I went to Juilliard. I can play This Little Light of Mine. And then I made the crucial mistake of taking the book out, taking out a hymnal.
You know what's funny, Darren? When I first heard that story, it really brought to light, no pun intended, how much I take for granted all of the things that have been instilled in me growing up in a Black church. Like how you play This Little Light of Mine, like how it goes, For a lot of my life, I thought there was only one way to sing and play This Little Light of Mine specifically, because it was so basic that I'm like, wait, how else does it go? I just never encountered that other version of that song particularly.
Oh, it wasn't until I was in an evangelical church where there was somebody had a little gathering at their home, and one of the guys who played in our band, and our band was very contemporary, but one of the guys who played in our band pulled out the hymn book, and we just started having an old hymnal, and it was very Phil and Gloria Gaither style. Like everything was this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. It was just like, why is it so fast? Where's the rush? Where are we going?
And also I realized too that when I think of the song This Little Light of Mine, I automatically start clapping in a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't really sing it any other way if you clap automatically in a certain type of way.
Baby, it was that 1 and 3 clap, or that 1, 2, 3, 4 clap.
That's the only way I know how to go. Anyway, how important has music been in your church experience?
I mean, music is just the foundation of so much. I think for many of us, our first memories of church are a song or a moment that was underscored by an organ or something along those lines. So yeah, everything I remember about church was either singing a song or really captured via some special music that was happening.
Did you all have a particular flavor or cadence?
We had two versions, because remember, my first church was a Catholic church, and we had two different choirs. We had our adult choir, which was more hymnals and everybody could read music, and it was more traditional choral, European, if you will, stylings, even if they were doing the Negro spirituals.
Oh my God. The stuff the men's choir would sing.
Oh, God. But, you know, it's just very almost operatic. In my youth choir, that was where I first started singing. We were doing more of the Kirk Franklin type stuff, Kirk Franklin and the Family, as well as Kirk Franklin and New Nation or whatever, different iterations. But we were doing the more contemporary gospel style music. It wasn't like full on Black gospel that many people might recognize, like a Sweet Holy Spirit mass choir. It wasn't one of those. It was gospel, but it was light. It was light-skinned gospel.
Gospel light is funny. But before we get too deep into it, Darren, let me introduce the voice that you heard at the beginning of the episode. Mark Miller is a graduate of Juilliard and Yale University with an expertise in choral conducting, sacred music, and voice. His hymns and anthems are sung by communities of faith throughout the world, and his album, Imagine the People of God, is available on iTunes. Mark believes that music, social justice, and the beloved community are inextricably tied. When he's not working, Mark is home in Plainfield, New Jersey, with Michael, his husband of 28 years, and their children, Keith and Elise. Mark was born in Vermont and was adopted as a baby into a family where 4 of his 7 siblings were also adopted.
I say sometimes I was raised by wolves, but that's not true. I was just raised by white people. And the family that raised me are just incredible people, Chuck and Carol Miller.
Mark's dad, Chuck, was a Methodist minister, and Mark's most vivid memories of going to church with his family involves his fascination with the huge pipe organ.
My whole little body was drawn into church by this pipe organ, and music, of course, people feel it, you know, but in this case, like, my body vibrated, it shook. I just felt, I couldn't name it at the time, but like God's presence, because the organ like fills the room in a way that I find other instruments don't. It turned out that was going to be my instrument.
The organ wasn't just an instrument for Mark. It was a foundational part of his spiritual identity.
For me, the organ kind of gave me a way into understanding the divine. And the organ also is a very interesting instrument because it's self-sufficient. Like, I didn't need a bass player or another player. And so I could make the experience happen on my own, for better or worse. But it also, I find organists to be, you know, sometimes we can be kind of solitary people. You know, we spend many hours in a church alone, practicing.
And in that alone time, Mark found not only spiritual solace, but a growing realization and comfort in another part of his identity.
Maybe because I knew I was gay at a pretty young age, that it was okay to be alone. Like, I felt okay to kind of have an experience where I didn't have to defend myself or explain myself, and I could just be. Even at the earliest ages, I knew of my attraction to other boys, but I didn't have a name for it. But church camp, I probably came out for the first time to another friend. By the time I was 15, I came out to my dad. When I finally was able to say the words, you know, Dad, I think I'm bi, because I couldn't even express how afraid I was if I could, you know, just throw all in and say I'm gay, because, you know, what do you do without a parent's love or acceptance? But he came through, you know, said, your mom and I love you no matter what, and God loves you. And I was 15. It was 1983.
Growing up, Mark says it was easier to develop his understanding of himself as a queer person than it was for him to understand the implications of being a Black person in a predominantly white area.
A signal moment for me probably came when I was 12 years old. And even though, my parents were white, they adopted 5 of their 7 children. So I had a brother and sister who were white. My younger sister and I were black or biracial. And I had 2 sisters and a brother who were Korean. And I have to say, as children do, I didn't see them as anything but my siblings and my parents. I didn't see my mom as, white. I just saw her as my mom. And I was 12 years old and I had a friend over. Now, we lived in a town where everyone was white. Our family was the only people of color I knew growing up. And this friend came over and my mom came in and fixed us a snack. And when she left the kitchen, my friend turned to me and was like, "Oh my God, your mom is white." And I looked at him shocked and I said, "Oh, wow, she is." Like, it was just as shocking for me to have that realization verbalized, something I had never even thought about, which actually, this is the first time in my life I'm thinking, usually someone has that realization when someone names you, you get called the N-word or you get called different or there's something that happens to you. But in this case, it was to my mom who was being named that. And I don't know how to say it. I didn't confront my racial identity until I was in my 20s because maybe I was, cisgender male, I was masculine presenting. I feel like I got away in high school with a lot of assimilation and not thinking much about it. My younger sister, who is about my shade and color, and she's a year younger than me, she had a very different experience growing up in our high school and a lot more harassment and just kind of casual racism that she had to deal with. But I didn't know anything about it, pretty naively, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, until I was older. But I had a full understanding, I felt, of my own sexual identity and who I was.
As he developed as a professional musician, Mark started playing in a variety of worship spaces, which eventually brought him face to face with the stark differences between the predominantly white culture he was raised in and the culture of Black churches.
The biggest revelation for me came when I was about 24 years old, working in a Black church for the first time as an organist, pipe organist. I realized there was a whole genre of music that I couldn't play. I had just graduated from Juilliard and I was working at the Convent Avenue Baptist Church in Harlem. And one of the Sundays, they had asked me to play This Little Light of Mine. And the minister of music said, "Mark, you able to do this?" And I was like, yeah. I kind of was offended. I went to Juilliard. I can play This Little Light of Mine. And then I made the crucial mistake of taking the book out, taking out a hymnal and realizing that as I was playing it, they weren't singing what I was playing. I had one of the most humiliating moments of my life, but also the greatest teaching moment where the minister said, "Brother Mark," he stopped me and it's like, "We do it the other way, the way you probably know." And so all the assumptions about the fact that I was a Black musician, but I couldn't play This Little Light of Mine, it really, really hit home. And I also realized that was the day I started deconstructing my white supremacist upbringing and what church music was all about.
Yeah.
Can you play it how you were playing it versus how they wanted you to play it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Can you hear this?
Yeah.
Yes. So out of the hymnal, I started playing. I'm gonna let it shine. Because that was in the Baptist hymnal at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never even heard that version in my life before.
Yeah, well, that was the version I was playing. And they were, of course, trying to sing This Little Light of Mine. And that went on for 5 verses.
Oh, wow.
When the pastor stopped me after verse 1 and said, we do it the other way, I heard him say with more life or something. So I was like, okay, here we go then.
I'm going to have to stop here for a second, Darren. Saying we do it with more life is kind of a read.
Listen, do it it's about like the
we're
seasoning.
Alive, Mark. You remember that, right?
We do it with the ancestors. Full
blessing. A little
blessing.
more salt with a little more pepper. But back to Mark.
I'm gonna let it shine. It's kind of funny because when I was adopted into my family, the only thing they knew, they were getting this little black boy from Vermont. It was, 1967, a closed adoption. And I guess when I arrived at the airport, it was a cold night. I was in a bundle, and they unwrapped the bundle. And my sister, who was 4 years old at the time, looked and was like, he's not that black. we wouldn't have talked about it in 1991 as a triggering moment. But when I couldn't play This Little Light of Mine, I felt like the 800 congregants were all looking at me going, he's not that black. My identity was in question and being molded and shaped by that traumatic experience. But instead of saying, I won't play that anymore, right? That's not my lane, I'll stay in my lane. I was like, no, I need to learn the music that moves the heart of these folks because it moves my heart. So I learned to shut the book. I learned to open my ears. I learned to use my eyes watching people play as opposed to looking at a static piece of music. Yeah. So now when I can be like, this little light, I'm gonna let it shine. And today I get the chance to teach organists how to play like that up at Yale. Play off the page. This is a performance practice you can learn and you need to know.
Isn't it funny how you can tell the difference between something that is being played with what we would call soul, right? As a musician, what is that difference to you?
There's something about this idea of rightness, the idea that there's a very specific, certain, strict way of playing and doing things that is somehow better than a more improvised, a more stylish, charismatic, if you will, standard. And historically, that was part of how you kept people in line, is how you maintained power. So for a lot of people who were raised in kind of a European tradition, music was about keeping people out. It was about setting these very strenuous standards that many people couldn't access. Whereas on the contrast, folk music or music of the people, that was all about people collaborating and making it new, and it was going to change and it was going to shift and it was going to be influenced by all these different things. It was never going to be pure anything. And so what ends up happening is the music of our people, of Black people, it was always about, here's a little of this and it's seasoned with a little of that and is informed by some of that. And we were always growing and changing. But for the academy, for people who have been in ivory towers, it was very much, no, this is the one right way. And this is the one way it's supposed to sound and how you're supposed to express it and emote it. And yeah, it really cuts people off. We just inherit this idea that there's supposed to be a right way to do music or to make music. And it really just depends on where you come from, who taught you, in so many words. I'm
going to keep it real with you, though, Darren. Regardless of who taught you, for the most part, we're all friends here.
Oh, God.
When they hear our music, they know it sounds better. I'm sorry. There's a universal flavoring. And what I think, this just dawned on me. I feel like the gospel tradition and the traditional way that Black music, even across the diaspora, plays with things like improvisation, it leaves room for a reaction. In some ways, those flourishes almost feel like the music is reacting to itself. Like it stops to go, did you catch that? Like it stops to respond.
It is interactive. It expects a call and response.
And it definitely makes you feel different. Like, of course, I love a good chamber music CD. See, I had to think phonograph, like what do they play it on?
Wow.
I love a good Gregorian chant like the next person, Darren, but there's something about these flourishes that really plays at the heartstrings in a different way and acknowledges the humanity of the listener, which in worship music, maybe it's just me, but feels like it facilitates something. And Mark came to this realization as well. He calls it playing with the spirit.
There are textbook players and there are people that play with the spirit. And I know it as soon as I hear it. You know when someone's playing with the spirit. It's kind of like a preacher, right? I've heard preaching with the spirit with a manuscript in front of them. And, I've heard deadly preaching with people who think they're, they have no manuscript, but they're just lost in the wilderness somewhere. But that playing with the spirit, I call it communication. You're able to communicate the spirit to people, which has a lot to do, I feel, as a performer, with making sure the spotlight isn't directed to you. The end point isn't you, like how good you're playing or how wonderful, the music is that you're making, but how wonderful is the Spirit of God in the room, like that binding together of people that make them feel that lifts us closer to, that place called home or God or the divine. Obviously, some of that cannot be taught, but I feel the values that I want to impart to musicians are things like you need to be present in the moment. Like you can't call it in if you want to have the spirit come. You need to be present, which means you need to be listening. In church, I like to make people, think differently. When we're, we might be singing, we are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. And then I'll just break out and, like a little Herbie Hancock. And it works because we are one in the Spirit, we are one. Those kind of moments, which are unscripted, but if you're open to the Spirit and you understand the sense of timing and flow, then I think you're headed to a good place of how you're going to lead the people. I work in mostly mainline Protestant, mostly majority white spaces, even today. And I would say the time of Trayvon Martin, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, something started happening to me. And as the onslaught kept building, Michael Brown and Eric Garner, and I could just go on and on, but I had always described my music in kind of happy terms. I'm a bridge builder. I try to bring communities together, and I do want to do that. But I really started thinking, Mark, are you just enabling white folks to feel okay with what's going on in these Christian spaces in America?
Hello, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. Andrew Gill here with a quick update on the status of this very podcast that you're listening to right now. Are they even still making new shows, you might ask yourself? Well, the answer is yes. Leah and I have been working on new episodes since January, but it is a little different now. Our PRX Templeton Foundation grant is done, so we are making the show independently, which means the only funding for our work comes from you, the listeners. But we do need more support than we currently have. We both have families, we both have kids, we both have other jobs, and so the time we have to dedicate to this project is quite scarce. Support from listeners like you makes it a justifiable investment of our time. You can do that at patreon.com/RTDR. You can find a link in the show notes there as well. If you can afford it, buy us 1 cup of coffee a month. If you can't afford it, keep listening. That is totally fine. Please tell a friend about it, though, because we also need to get a bigger listener base in order to attract advertisers. If you would like to advertise on the show, email us rtdrpod@gmail.com, and we can work that out. That would be wonderful. Again, we think this show is very important. It's an important aspect of understanding how we got to the point we're in now as a country and as humans who practice religions and enjoy pop culture. Again, patreon.com/RTDR is where you can support us monetarily. And if you can't afford it, tell a friend, tell 5 friends. Thanks so much for listening. Back to the show.
Darren, I feel like this musical journey that Mark has been on, that has allowed him to connect with his Black identity in this way through Black church, which is at the core in a lot of ways of Black American culture. I feel like he was in a bubble, and then that bubble exploded when he came to terms with his Blackness in a certain type of way. And it's one of those things where you can't put the genie back in the bottle, as they say. You can't unsee something once you see it. In some ways, it feels like you can't get that close to Blackness and embodying, playing with the spirit and the ways that Mark was on this journey of really understanding who he is as a Black man, and then go back into the bubble where you don't see or understand what happens with race in America.
Black struggle is a huge part of our story and our experience here and globally, but it also still isn't the whole story, right? We have our joy songs. We have thousands of years of history pre-enslavement and so forth. There's so much that we pull from that you still see it in the rejoicing in our dancing. You still see it in how modern hip hop and modern dance still echoes back to some of the movements that have existed for thousands of years on the continent. Like, there's so much to us, but at the same time, yeah, like in this country, there is a deep grief. There is a deep pain that comes out in many of our expressions, even our shouting. It's like we got to shout our way over, right? We got to think about I'll fly away and, being beyond the suffering of this present world. There's just a lot that we hold all at once. And then to contrast that with whiteness and the ways that whiteness often is looking away, whereas we turn toward what's going on. Whiteness is often like, oh, let's sing about the valleys and the hills and the birds and the bees. And Black folks is like, no, I'm going to sing about how I got over. And not to ignore it. And yeah, it continuously caused people to rethink how they look at the world.
Coming to terms with these types of realizations forced Mark to rethink who he was and what he thought he wanted to do.
I began to think about how I really want to be somebody more like Harriet Tubman. Like, I feel like I wanted to help bring people to a safe space, or like I realized my work is not necessarily on the surface, but it's kind of working subversively or trying to bring us all over to a more liberating place, not just building bridges to what, what already has been created. Being biracial, growing up the way I did, being queer, gay in a straight heterosexist world, I think many of us understand that the double consciousness, or how do we manage. And I thought of myself as more unique in that way till I realized, no, we all are that. We all are that way. And if we are honest with ourselves, we know exactly who we are. We have our identities in so many different spaces and places. And I definitely have struggled. I've wanted to run back to my parents. My parents have been my rocks. They passed away on this plane of existence, 2018 and 2022. Our home is home for many, many folks as well, because, what does home mean but belonging, acceptance? I've thought about forgiveness a lot. Like, what does forgiveness mean? Because I think it's at the heart of the spiritual journey. I think more about the values of what makes home, and then I try to live those out and try to find the people that are interested in living those out. And that usually creates a really great group of people that I get to be around. But it's a lot of like DIY, like we're going to create these spaces.
It's interesting that through connecting with church, Mark was able to understand a part of his identity that he wasn't familiar with, which isn't the typical trajectory that we hear on this show. Church usually starts off as a big part of our guests' identities, and then they step away in some form or fashion to understand other parts of their identities that couldn't be explored in church.
Yeah, absolutely. The ways that we come to understand ourselves because of the communities that we're in just can't be underscored enough. I think about the ways that me stepping into more white evangelical spaces actually made me even more aware of my own Blackness. Whereas in Black spaces, I was more aware of my queerness. And in all of it, it's all like, what is my masculinity? What is my Blackness? What is, what are these things, and who gets to define them and who gets to determine them? And what I think is beautiful for all of us is that we do have this space of self-determination. We have this space of growing and defining and redefining and reshaping, just like Mark is able to blend different styles of music from his various backgrounds. We all are blending together our experiences and our stories and our styles and our songs and, telling a new story.
And that telling of a new story is the great part about how faith and spirituality seems to be evolving. People are really finding ways to make it their home and make it their own. Like Mark said, we're creating those spaces rather than stepping away in order to discover ourselves. And I think that's really beautiful.
If we take that liberty to improvise, to know and to step away from that idea that we have to get it right by the book, whether that's the scripture or if it's by the music songbook, if we step away from that just enough so we can improvise and find that creativity and find the ways that God is working in us and through us that might not be written on the page, I think there's something profound that can be unlocked in all of us, and there's something amazing that can come out of it. But that's a brave space. It's a challenging space. And folks are going to not like you sometimes because you're not playing by the rules that they were playing by. But yeah, that's my hope, that we could just all take something from this as an opportunity to be like, you know what? I'm going to try something different today. I'm going to make this fancy.
The Second Sunday podcast is hosted by Esther Coro and Darren Calhoun. But podcasting is a team sport, so a big thank you to our dream team.
Our producers, Esther Ikoro, Anna Deshawn, and Nicole Hill. Our associate producer, Amber Walker.
Our sound designer, Florence Burrow-Adams, and our managing producers, Jocelyn Gonzalez and Courtney Florentine.
Our opening theme song is Maya B's original track titled They Don't Know. You should download the full song today.
To learn more about today's guests or the show, visit our show notes on our website, secondsundaypod.com, and on Instagram @secondsundaypod. Second Sunday is a production of The Cube, spelled with a Q, in partnership with the PRX Big Questions Project, which is generously supported by the John Templeton Foundation and produced by PRX Productions.
The Cube is your #1 curated platform to discover the best BIPOC and QTPOC podcasts.
Support this show and more like it by joining the Cube app and follow the Cube across social media @the Cube app.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode.